On this episode of the Press Rewind Prince Lyrics podcast, we're going to be talking about a song that I think should have been on the Purple Rain soundtrack, and that is Possessed. And joining me on this episode is first-time guest Jack Riedy. Welcome to the show, Jack.
Hey, Jason. Thanks for having me. I appreciate you making the time to get on the phone. Hey, sliding into DMs can really work wonders, turns out. All the rumors are true, so thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm easy that way, right? So just slide in my DMs, and you can be on the show. All you have to do is slide in my DMs. It's that simple. Give me a compelling reason, and you're on. So anyway, Jack, you first-time guest, as I mentioned. I would appreciate it if you would give the listeners an opportunity to kind of get to know you a little bit more and understand where your entry point with Prince's music and how you became aware of him and where has that led you on your journey with Prince's music?
Totally. Yeah, I will say I'm sort of removed from the people that grew up with Prince. I have my mom's copy of Purple Rain in my record collection. I'm in my late 20s, so I think really the first time I was aware of him as someone, that was a performer and, a important person was seeing the Super Bowl halftime show, which was, I think, during my I think I was even younger than middle school. I think I was like in elementary school still, because I remember buying Purple Rain on iTunes like the day before because it was on sale. And it was like, oh, this is supposed to be a big deal, album from the 80s I've never heard. Let me check this out before this guy plays the Super Bowl. And of course, it didn't really make any sense to me as a pre-pubescent kid, but it's sunk its teeth into me, as like, oh, this is great. I don't get it at all. I don't really understand the lyrics. What is happening here? And then especially getting that paired with, the Super Bowl halftime show itself, which is so stunning. It was really, a remarkable kind of combo to latch its way into my young subconscious. So from there, I was a Prince fan, in high school and in college, getting into just really the 80s, golden age period. Kind of haphazardly, bouncing around based on the reviews I read in, 500 greatest albums of all time type lists. So, Sign of the Times was a big one for me as a result after that. And, kind of haphazardly getting through the singles and things like that. But, especially with his death in 2016, that was a big, moment for me to sort of get an understanding of how big his fan base was beyond me, because for a while he was sort of a legacy act. He wasn't touring as much later in his life. And so I think, for a lot of people, they sort of began reappreciating, especially very publicly, his music, which was really beneficial for me as someone who's a younger fan to really start to get some of that context around like, oh yeah, Prince was a big deal. He was a superstar, but he was a superstar. And, hearing just random strangers tell their stories about, Purple Rain and things like that was really a big deal for me at that point. So I have like Prince anecdotes for days because I never saw him live, but I have some chance encounters like going to Paisley Park while he was still around and visiting Paisley Park in the years since with it being a museum and everything. But as I've started a music criticism freelancing period, I've done a lot of one-off stories on Prince music here and there, like a story about Madhouse for Vinyl Me Please, writing a personal essay about some of his music as it relates to the Batman soundtrack, and then tying a lot of that writing all together into a compilation book called Electric Word Life that I published in 2021 with my fiance doing the art, this really gorgeous package with these illustrations and this floral thing. I'll have to send you, I don't know if I have any physical copies, but I'll at least send you a digital scan so you can get an idea what I'm talking about. But
yeah, please do.
The collection ends up being sort of about not only Prince's music, but also about being a fan of his music and what being a fan of music can be like for someone. I think that's sort of the meta text for me, at least, is taking these articles and combining them and, seeing how Prince sort of emerges. But in particular, I wrote a story about D'Angelo, who's a really, really fantastic, R&B artist, who's very reclusive, very inspired by Prince, and, is really, really talented in some of the ways that Prince was, and has always sort of emulated him. And, I think it's interesting to think about me loving Prince's music is something that I have in common with another musical genius, like D'Angelo. Sort of goes to show the universality of that music, right? I don't have much in common skills-wise, life-wise with someone like D'Angelo, but I love his music in the same way I do Prince's. And it kind of leads us to today where, the song is sort of about a love or lust or an idea gone too far, if I can segue.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, thank you for that. I do greatly appreciate having any younger Prince fans on the show, because a lot of us, in the 40 plus, 40 to 60, 40 to 65 age range, we make up a large percentage, I think, of the people who champion Prince's music online through things like podcasts and YouTube channels and books and blogs. But there's obviously people who are younger than that, people who did not grow up with Prince, did not experience the 80s in real time, the massive success that Prince experienced himself. And we were along with him on that ride, but those who were not, they may still love the 80s, but they may look at it in a different light. That's just a part of the cohesive and whole collection of his discography and of his work, because there's no nostalgic attachments to those songs and those albums from the 80s like they are for me, for example. So
yeah,
it's
I
really
feel like
cool.
A lot of my high school years was like, walking around pointing at a newspaper, or I guess pointing at my iPod and being like, no, you don't understand. Like, I know you think Prince is just like this old guy who's, some 80s pop star that we don't even think about. But no, Prince's music is in everything still, in, pointing to like things I was hearing in rap or in pop music on the radio or things like that, and being able to say, no, this is a big deal. There's DNA from Prince in this. And I think there was a big generation gap with technology in a lot of those ways. For a while, trying to get Prince music was not easy. You couldn't buy it on iTunes, or you couldn't hear it on YouTube, or, a lot of the ways that I think people of, my age bracket, late 20s, early 30s, were, getting music all these sorts of ways that, Prince made it very difficult to partake in. I remember it being a big deal when he got on the iTunes store, when he got some of his music on streaming, and then it was only on some streaming services. And, obviously a lot has changed in that regard, but I do think there was sort of a generation gap that was created by that. And, for me, it was sort of this interesting, almost secretive thing that, paradoxically, it's like, here's this superstar who is, a very big deal, but not necessarily as visible as he used to be, at least to people my age. And so for me, I feel like I'm working backwards a little bit. It's been very gratifying for me to understand Prince's career, not in real time, but to try and understand it that way. There's such a progression you can observe in his music, from album to album, from song to song, the collaborators that work with him, all those things. And so, there's so much great music to dig through that you can just enjoy for what it is. But especially for someone like me, who, as I'm sure we will continue to reveal, is a huge music nerd, to be able to understand these things chronologically is really gratifying. And especially then you factor in, the fan reaction or the input from people who were there at the shows or seeing the movies when they came out, and actually having that public opinion in real time, because, he was also someone who paid attention to how his records were perceived and certainly how they were selling. So it's really helpful to have that, sort of other side of the generation gap for me, is that real time stuff.
Yeah, yeah, it is very valuable, I think, as well, and valuable to the listeners who are of my age bracket to hear your perspectives and where you're coming from with his music and things like you've mentioned, having to point out that to people who weren't as familiar, like he isn't just a legacy act. And hey, that latest song by Janelle Monáe, I mean, she was very much influenced by Prince, and maybe they didn't know that or didn't care, but you could point it out, and that's obviously valuable to his legacy.
I definitely
Sure.
feel like I'm beating that drum a little bit. I just back in October actually DJ'd a full Prince vinyl set for the anniversary of 1999, and part of that was like, no, I think people need to hear these songs in a dark room with a dance floor and stuff. Not on the radio as a totally 80s weekend thing.
Yeah, nice. No, that's awesome. And since I completely screwed up your earlier segue, I'm going to latch onto that segue, the 1999 segue that you handed me just now, and talk about Possessed, which is, the song of the day. So Possessed, we got two versions that we have been gifted over the past 5 years, 6 years, 5.5. We've got the 1982 version that wound up on the 1999 Super Deluxe edition that was released in 2019. And that version, the 82 version, was recorded in May of 1982 at Prince's Kiowa Trail home studio in Chanhassen, Minnesota, which is why it was included as part of the 1999 Super Deluxe. It's right in that time frame when he was writing and recording songs for what would be on that album. However, 2 years prior to that, in 2017, we got a version of Possessed that on the Purple Rain Deluxe edition that was more widely known, I think, because of its inclusion, at least musical inclusion, its background music in a scene in the movie Purple Rain, but also its inclusion, a live version of it on the 1985 Syracuse VHS and broadcast that went out in 85 from the Purple Rain tour. So there was two opportunities for people to become aware of this song, one more overt, the live version, one kind of hidden as background music in the Purple Rain movie, which is why in the intro I suggested that maybe this song should have been on a proper Purple Rain soundtrack. And what I mean by proper is songs that could be heard in the film, not just Prince and the Revolution, 9 tight tracks of Prince and the Revolution. If it was like a double album, like what Graffiti Bridge was 6 years later, where it was like a collection of all the different music, there would have been the Time stuff, there would have been Apollonia 6 stuff, could have gotten Modern Air, and we would have gotten Possessed. Hypothetically, if that Purple Rain soundtrack 2-disc version actually was released, or an accompaniment to the Prince and the Revolution tracks. But nevertheless,
you want to talk
really
about not getting it without the context, like listening to Purple Rain, knowing it's a soundtrack, but then getting the sort of loose explanation from my parents of like, yeah, the movie's pretty good, but like not all the songs from the album are really in it, and then there's a bunch of other music, like, knowing that there's like not this straight 1-to-1 comparison in the way that you grow up listening to like actual soundtracks for musicals, and it's just a 1-to-1 thing. Very good little introduction to the sort of idiosyncrasies of Prince's whole thing, right?
Yeah, very, very idiosyncratic, and thank you for explaining that, because in real time I didn't think anything of it, because I didn't watch the movie until about 2 years after I'd heard the soundtrack. So the fact that there was all this other music, like Jungle Love, I had heard on the radio a bunch of times by the time I finally saw the film. I knew Sex Shooter from MTV before I saw the film. So I'm like, oh, so there's just all this collection of stuff that has existed in pop culture and music, modern music at the time. This happened to be in this movie, and I didn't really think of it as odd or kind of bucking any trends from a soundtrack perspective, even though all the other soundtracks of that era did not follow that. Footloose had just songs from the movie in the Footloose. Like every song that you could find in the movie was on the soundtrack. Every single song that was in Flashdance the movie was on the soundtrack. Sorry, Purple Rain fans. You had to buy 3 separate albums to get the music, and then you still didn't get it all.
Well, what's crazy about hearing, I guess what you'd call final version that's out now that we can all stream, that's from the Purple Rain Deluxe, is I think the final Possessed is fantastic. And it goes to show how much music that there was around this time, that it wasn't even ever fully released. It was just background music as an instrumental in the movie. Because I think this song is incredible. It, could stack up against some of the best stuff that they've written from this period. And I'm kind of mad in retrospect. I'm like, how did it take me this long to hear this song, with the reissue whenever it was a few years ago? I think I actually first heard it on a bootleg from the birthday show, which I think is from June 1984, right before Purple Rain itself came out. That was one of the first live recordings I heard that wasn't, the official released albums like the One Night Alone and things like that. And so to get not only this really great concert from, this peak era, 1984, but it has a couple songs in there that, weren't ever released in any other form officially. Possessed was on there, I think All Day, All Night, a couple others like maybe Our Destiny and things like that. So I'm hearing this song that, is not part of what I understand to be Prince's catalog. And then it's in a way different version performed with the Revolution. Like the live music version of, 8 people playing it is a lot closer to the James Brown roots of the song than the Purple Rain era version, which is, just really out there, very few live instruments to it at all. And it's just this weird, like multifaceted song that you can hear in all these different versions. And I think the fact that it never was released in a final form makes these other versions, hard to forget. It's hard to point to, the final, ultimate version of Possessed. Of course, that's the one. You kind of have to piece it together, or at least engage with all these different versions that exist of this song.
Yeah, and there's the 1983 version with Prince and the Revolution that was recorded that I have not personally heard. I would love to hear the live band version of this song. It's probably similar to what we ended up hearing on the Purple Rain tour. If you heard any bootlegs of when it was performed during the tour, or of course in the Syracuse show that was released officially. But still, I would like to hear like the studio band version someday. But that's a wish for a different day. I think
before we jump into the song itself, I want to say I'm thrilled
you
brought up the double album idea, because I have to give a shout out to Zachary Hoskins at Dance Music Sex Romance, who did this great sort of like alternate timelines little fan fiction about what if he had rushed out an album in 1983 called The Dawn, and so the movie never happens, but Possessed, of course, makes the cut. And I actually had a similar thing in my book, Electric Word Life, that I just titled What If Purple Rain Was a Double Album? And of course, I had to put Possessed on the track list. I put it after the Beautiful Ones and before the extended hallway version of Computer Blue, because I had the same thought of like, let's get the track list with all the like 8-minute, 9-minute stretched out versions that, of course, will never actually be pressed to vinyl, so they can just run on forever. Let's go, double deluxe on this. So I'm glad we're all having the same idea of where's our double album version? What's going on here?
Yes. Every single version of this hypothetical double album Purple Rain must include the hallway speech version of Computer Blue. No questions asked.
And that's another one, you talk about like bootlegs and, sort of the unofficial stuff. Obviously, there was a final version of Computer Blue, but I remember hearing about the hallway speech version for years before I had ever actually heard of a version of it. And I think that is a classic example of, they were right to trim it down. Like, I get it. It's cool to hear the final version, but now that I'm used to hearing the deluxe, 15-minute version, I'm like, no, I get it. They should have edited it. Now that it's no longer lost to me, I get it. I see why they did it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I see why they did it, but I just love that version, the long version, so much that I just can't I can't think of a world without it now. You know, like, Purple Rain to me has to have, like, it's like, oh, cool. Do you like Computer Blue? Well, you're gonna love this. I play it for people, and they're like, "What was that? And what did I just listen to?" Because it kind of blows them away, but also confuses them a little bit, which it totally would have done to any mainstream audiences in 1984. They would have been, "What the fuck is this?"
That's what we love him for, right? That's what we're here for.
Definitely why we're still talking about his music, I think. So, okay, back to Possessed. All right, so this song being as kind of well-known but still unheard of, or unheard, not unheard of, but more unheard in various versions, official studio versions. So we were lucky enough to get 2 released versions, and the lyrics to both versions are very similar. So, like, unlike some songs where Prince reworks them, they take on a completely new life, or he changes the lyrics very significantly. There are differences, but they're pretty slight, at least from the various verses, or the way that the various verses are concerned. Now, both versions are long. Both versions clock in at over 7 minutes plus. I think one of them even hits the 8-minute mark. And there's a lot of stuff going on in the second half of each of these songs. And they're both very different second halves of the songs, but the first, 3 verses and the chorus are very similar. So kind of when we're thinking about what is Possessed about, what are the themes of the song, and we could talk about the subtle differences. It's probably worth talking about, but I don't think at the end of the day it's really going to make a big difference in terms of how we perceive the song's themes, subject matter, and what he was trying to kind of convey with this track. Jack, do you kind of agree with that, or do you think the differences or the changes that he make are significant?
No, I think you're right that especially on the page, it's very clear the 2 versions of the song are the same song, right? Like, the lyric is very consistent. As you said, the changes that come lyrically are mostly in sort of like the ad libs or the breakdown, the extended sections where it's clearly kind of improvised and it's more of a, whether it's a call and response or more of a monologue, he's just kind of messing around and trying out different things, which is cool to hear those differences. We can definitely dig in there. But, the main difference is not in sort of the song itself, but more in the recording of it, right? It's the production being several, BPM faster. And really, I think the delivery is what's really striking to me, hearing the 2 versions back to back, is, the vocal on the first version of the song feels more like a demo. It's slower, and his tone vocally is so kind of relaxed, and it sounds really cool. It sounds slick. It sounds nonchalant, which doesn't really work with the theme of this sort of desperation and the feeling of being possessed. You listen to the Purple Rain era version, and his vocal performance just sounds so stressed out, but also turned on, and sort of in capturing the desperation that the lyric is getting at. I think the Purple Rain version, while we're at it, is just I think it's the closest one we can point to as the finished version. It's the best version. If you only have time for one, that is the one to hear. But I think hearing the 2 back to back is great. It really does feel like you're going from a really good demo to a finished song. And I think it's because he builds up the lyrical theme so much better in this finished version.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think the 84 version is, in my opinion, the definitive version, and the one that I would choose if I had to. And part of it is I like how it does sound more desperate, and he sounds more angry, I think, a little bit. And I have I don't know, it's maybe a bullshit theory, and I might be reaching, and I want to talk about it at some point, maybe not quite yet, but as to why I think that tone changes a little bit from 82 to 84, based off of potentially somebody that in his periphery or in his life that he could have been singing the song about or thinking about when he wrote it. But in essence, Possessed subject matter, the song, the lyrics, he's essentially talking about how he is kind of possessed with lust for this person. He's going crazy. He says, something's the matter, baby. I'm going insane. Something inside of me keeps talking to my brain. Why can't I stop this satanic lust or demonic lust in the 84 version? That's one line he changes, just one word, satanic to demonic, but in essence they mean the same thing. I know I shouldn't hold you. My body says I must. So he kind of feels like he has no control over himself. He has no control over his actions. And what the song is, really kind of trying to convey, I think, here is this woman is essentially taken over his entire being to the point where he's becoming maybe a little bit dangerous. Dangerous to himself, maybe dangerous to others, dangerous to just the fact that he can't stop thinking about somebody else. And it's more of an infatuation, if you want to call it that, but he feels like he's being possessed by her. And just the act of being possessed by another person kind of conjures up imagery of, demonic possession, like The Exorcist, or, and he says demonic and satanic. So, of course, maybe he was watching The Exorcist and was thinking, what if I was possessed not by the devil to do evil, but to, possessed by this woman to be just this lustful creature that can't control himself and only thinks about this woman. So, I mean, again, that's just a really basic kind of somewhat summary of what the song may be trying to convey. What did I miss, Jack? What else do you see?
Yeah, I think you're totally right that it boils down to this lust that, he even names checks in the lyric that it's either satanic, demonic, but it's this feeling that's possessing him, externally, and sort of taking him over, which I think is a really compelling image. Something that I've been thinking about a lot is the way that he's sort of getting at this dark side or dark illusion idea of lust as something scary, something controlling, in contrast to so much of his work that is about sex and about lust in a very sort of friendly or positive or
godlike.
Or exactly, godlike light. And I think it's very interesting to think of Prince almost looking at lust and sex as like the Force in Star Wars. It's like this, there's good sides, there's bad sides, like, it's a spectrum, right? Like, and I think this song is sort of him, not for the first time, but definitely perhaps for the most overtly, at least at this stage in his career, hinting at this sort of devilish idea, the demonic counterpoint of, some of his other lyrics and some of his other songs. At the same time, you talk about the devil in rock music, and it goes all the way back before rock music. You're getting into songs from the blues that, tie sex and death and the devil and God all up into one stew. So it's certainly not a new theme in pop music overall, but I think there's something obviously very unique about the way Prince pulls it off by making it into this big dance track. And I think he also makes the idea of possession sound really sexy. I think the way he talks about the song, even before you get into sometimes the almost orgasmic ad-libbing that he's doing at the end, doing all these different voices and all this stuff in the breakdown that we can get into more in detail. But he talks about being possessed at times, not even by the idea of lust, but by this woman's voice or her ideas rattling around in his head. And I think there's something to that idea of, I can't stop thinking about you. You're in my head. I feel like I'm possessed by you. So anything that I'm doing is not under my control. It's under your control. He's playing with these interesting ideas of power and control, and it doesn't really seem to be all that clear who's in charge. But not in a way that like blurs consent, but just sort of plays with power in a way that I think is really sexy and really powerful in its own right.
Yeah, he, especially early in his career, obviously on the show, I've only made it through the 80s, and I took some steps back to do these vault songs. So we'll see as his career progresses and his songwriting progresses, if some of these themes continue to pop up. But specifically in the 80s, he's really plays with that notion that you brought up of control and who has control over his actions. Like, he seems to have a lot of that's a songwriting trope that he utilized more than once, where he kind of almost gives up control to the woman. And it's maybe subconscious, but it certainly feels at times where he's doing it because he wants to. And going back to, again, your comment about consent, he acts like he's all taken aback by it and feels like he has, like it's potentially a bad thing. But you also start to wonder, like, is this like a kink? Does he kind of like get off on, allowing these women to like walk all over him and control him in ways? Some of these songs, you kind of wonder if that's really what he's exploring, and like he wanted, or really, and maybe enjoyed those aspects of his relationships where the woman was very domineering and controlling. Whether or not that perpetuated in his real life, where he would maybe seek out women to date that weren't maybe as controlling, I don't know. I mean, that's for other people to kind of point out, people who knew him more intimately. But some of these songs really plays with that a lot, and it's not just Possessed. Another song that I don't know if it's really like a spiritual cousin to the song, but it makes me think of it because a lot of the same language is used. There's a song, another unreleased song called "Lust You Always." We have to assume, based off of Prince's Fault, that these two songs were recorded, written around the same time, and Prince is playing with a lot of the same themes in "Lust You Always," where he just feels like he's out of control with this, he uses the word lust multiple times, obviously, in "Lust You Always," but he uses lust in this song more than once. It's not as repeated quite as often, but it's certainly used. And I definitely think that the ideas of lust and being kind of possessed by somebody sexually is driving him mad, and driving him in a way that he's basically claiming that he's no longer in control. And both of those songs kind of do that, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think there's, I think that's part of his appeal at the end of the day, is the way he plays around with being the alpha male by not being the alpha male, to use I guess a simplified term. It's always a little ambiguous in a lot of his love songs. He's playing with ideas of masculinity and femininity. Is these are well-trod grounds for Prince scholars to discuss and things like that. But I think you can see it even in what on its surface appears to be a really straightforward song, right? It's a dance song. It's very horny. He's so in love with you, he feels like he's possessed, But I think, to his credit, he takes that pretty simple idea and adds all these other dimensions on top of it, that warrant some analysis, playing with these ideas of control. And it's killing me because I'm trying to find the quote. I was flipping through the Purple Rain era sessions book by Dwayne Tudall, and there was a great quote that I was reading earlier today about, Prince's appeal to women. And I believe it was Susan Rogers that was writing it. But that was one thing that she name checked specifically was, when he wrote to women, it was not, I'm going to do this to you. It was, hey, why don't you do this to me? Look at like Do Me Baby as an example, is one that she brings up, but this idea of speaking to women in a way that was less about objectification and more about engaging with them emotionally and more in a relationship. And in the quote, she mentions that one of the real failures of anyone who tried to imitate Prince moving forward was taking this sort of stock masculine approach of saying, oh, I'm going to do this to you and I'll do it better than anyone else, et cetera, and really missing sort of the forest for the trees, and how he wrote a lot of his songs about sex and directed at women with this, different, somewhat alternative perspective. that has a lot more layers and I'd say more sophistication to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and somebody could listen to a song like Possessed or Lust You Always and maybe not think of it quite so dangerously or so darkly as maybe some of the lyrics imply when you listen to them or you look at them, read them off a page, for example, and just think of it as just a really like strong, in your face declaration of attraction. Because then, like, he talks about, well, the chorus is, I'm possessed, I don't know what to do, I'm possessed, I'm either stone crazy in love with you or I'm so crazy in love with you, just, again, depending on which version. So the chorus is very simple, but he says love, I'm in love with you in the chorus, so he's not simply just talking about lust and sexual attraction. He's trying to at least put it out there in the chorus that there's some love involved, whether it's I'm in love with you because that's the closest way or the easiest way for me to have sex with you is if we're in love, or if I say I love you. You know, you could look at it that way and be more cynical about it, I suppose. But I think that like in the second verse when he says something's the matter, you're all I see, your voice is all I hear, I wish I didn't need you, wish I didn't care, I've got to make some love to you because it's much too much to bear. And
I'm possessed.
Yeah, and so those those lines, if you look at them differently, if you look at them from a different perspective, they could be looked at more sweetly, or just like as a, like I said, a declaration more of just a love or attraction, or something that somebody would say, and like a girl might think that, oh, that's cute, I'm all you think about, cool. Except for when he says, I wish I didn't need you, wish I didn't care, because that again implies that maybe he's feel like he's going too far down that path, or it's been, you know, too much to think about. Now, let's say hypothetically you're a woman that a guy you've been dating for a few months or whatever comes up and says, like, I can't stop thinking about you. You're all I see when I go, you know, I close my eyes, I see your face when you're not around. I can't think of anything but you. I mean, it just depends. It depends on how it's delivered, I think, and depends on where they're at in their relationship. If that comes across as maybe too needy or a bit possessive.
Well, and that's the thing, when you hear Prince's delivery on the song, you know, he sounds tormented. You know, you believe him when he says, you know, I wish I didn't need you, wish I didn't care. Like, it's, you know, he sings it kind of from his guts. And I think, you know, it speaks to the strength of that vocal performance. But you're right too, that the lyric itself is, on the page, you can read it different ways. You know, the tone comes out in a lot of the, not just the music, but the vocal itself. You could also sort of coo those lyrics and it might come across, you know, in a totally different way, but that's not the story Prince is telling. It's so locked into this idea of like, no, I'm possessed and it is, you know, ruining my life right now, but I can't get over it. You know, I'm coming back for more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the delivery is everything in this song, especially in the 84 version. And that delivery does not give you kind of the warm and fuzzies that maybe some of these lyrics and lines would if it was a love song, sung in a different manner, and just some slightly tweaked words. I mean, again, there's certain lines in the song that tell us that this is not healthy. At least it's not healthy to the person who's being possessed. Mm-hmm. The demonic lust / satanic lust. I wish I didn't need you, wish I didn't care. That, again, is not something you would tell somebody that you really were in love with, that you wanted to express this to them, you know, as a declaration of that sort of love. And then in the third verse, he says, something's the matter, baby, my mind's in a daze. I'm tripping off your love, it's so hard to relate. Can't stop this yearning, Lord knows I've tried. And he says, either free me from the spell or free me from despair in the 84 version. Again, the 84 version is a little darker. I'm much too young to die. And that line stays the same. So it just keeps going downhill a little bit. Like my mind's in a daze. I'm tripping off your love. Tripping meaning, like he's almost like a drug in some ways. This possession, this lust is a little bit of a drug. Although he says love, but I think love and lust in this song, even though he says it in a way in the chorus where you couldn't get that he's talking about true love, I almost wonder if he's really just kind of using those terms interchangeably, and the love he's talking about in this song and the way it's delivered is more like just another stand-in for lust.
Well, you want to talk about a mind being in a daze, right? Like, imagine trying to sort of piece all these shards of psychosexual drama together at like age 10 after hearing, Darling Nikki flowing into, the rest of side 2 or whatever, right? Like, I think that is, in some ways, the power of Prince is he's got all these fumbling combinations of love and lust and sex and death and religion all kind of mashed together, a lot of times all within one song, and it makes it somewhat hard to parse, especially as I think, trying to come from a more logical adult perspective. But I tell you what, it makes a lot of sense, I think, emotionally, especially as, a confused, perpetually horny teen. Like, I think he's able to articulate this pretty universal sense of, like, angst and frustration and pent-up sexual energy in a way that doesn't come across as immature, because he's elevated the stakes and the drama to this totally existential level of I'm too young to die, of I feel like I'm on drugs, of all I hear is your voice. And it resonates, it resonates to this day. It resonates to the modern ear. It resonates to people far beyond that, stage of their life. It's fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that much too young to die line sticks with me personally, just because he says the word free me from the spell, or free me from despair. So either way, like if you just look at it from the 82 version, free me from the spell, I'm much too young to die. I kind of get from that he's saying the spell that she has put on him. I mean, again, I have to put most of the blame on him for being put under the spell. I doubt that, we're not talking literally a spell, like she didn't cast some voodoo magic on him. He's horny for her, like you said, and it's kind of his own fault. Like, he should be able to find balance in his life. And the fact that
right, and there's this push and pull here of, like, he's complaining so much about this possession and it's wrecking his life, but here he is, singing this song and saying, like, okay, well, so I need you back. I'm calling you up, or I'm coming over, or whatever it is. It's the same push and pull of, like, oh, it's so bad, he's possessed, so he can't help himself, so he's calling her, but he loves it, because he's in love with her, or because he's in lust. I don't think there's quite like a clear answer, especially like we keep saying in the 1984 version. I think the failing of the 1982 version is it's a little bit slower, so it's got, a different groove, which isn't a problem on its own, but especially with Prince singing it slower accordingly, and his delivery is way more, almost closer to like this proto-rap thing, similar to Irresistible Bitch or Feel You Up, which is a really cool groove, but doesn't work with this feeling of desperation. He sings about being possessed, and on the older version, you don't believe him. It doesn't sound like he's possessed. He doesn't have that desperation in his voice.
No, exactly. And that's again, like you said, one of the failings of that 82 version is it's missing that a little bit. And then the 82 or the 84 version, when he says "free me from despair, I'm much too young to die," you almost get the sense that he's almost contemplating suicide in some ways. Like, this, it's so bad. I mean, maybe not literally, of course. I don't know, but it's certainly possible you can get from that. Like, he's just so overwhelmed, and maybe so he says despair, so you kind of got to get a feeling that he's experiencing some sort of negative emotions over this, to the point where the fact that he has to bring up death as a potential end game for him, when this is all done, it really does take it to a dark place that you wouldn't necessarily expect a song about just general lust, general attraction to go. And that's why the song, specifically the 84 version, does imply that he's in a much darker mental state than the 82 version. Everything about it just screams possession in not in a good way. Not in a good way. He's not possessed by the Holy Spirit. He's not possessed by, goodwill towards men. He's possessed by this kind of just gut-wrenching attraction where, he just can't shake it. And he blames her, but still wants, we kind of both agree that while he puts the blame squarely on her for just being too hot, he ultimately, I think, understands that it's on him. And even a line like "Free me from despair," that despair again is coming internally, which is where a lot of people who are experiencing really dark thoughts in their head about themselves and about their future, it's all internal for the most part. And a lot of that is just our brains tricking us into thinking that we're not worthy, or maybe he's being tricked into thinking that he's not worthy of this woman and not worthy of her time, and so he just thinks about her instead of actually doing something about it. If he's in lust with her, he should maybe approach her. Maybe he doesn't feel like he can.
Yeah, and I think there's something to, the instrumentation on the 84 version to me sounds so close to When Doves Cry in terms of the beat and a lot of the instrumentation around it. It doesn't really have any of the rock guitar, but it's also missing the bass the same way When Doves Cry is. And, I think they both have a similar sense of torment and conflict, but it also is very clear that it's all internal. It's like the psychological debate almost that's going on inside of him that, at least on the outside is, externalized as just what could be a normal flirtation or a normal relationship. But, on the inside, he's reaching out of a bathtub, because he feels like he can't get a connection with you, Trying to remember other stuff from that video. But, I think it does a really great job of conveying that, torment and that sort of psychological, problem that he's dealing with. And then when you get into the last couple choruses and it gets into this breakdown, more extended section, I love this sort of tossed off, "Does anybody want this body?" thing that he tosses off, almost like an ad lib or what have you. It sounds to me very like petty, and sort of, again, it feels very almost like an immature thing of something a teenager would say of like, okay, well, if you won't pick up the phone, like, does any, in a crowded bar or a crowded club or something, like, does anybody want me? Just this sort of, sort of stupid bit of, it almost feels like you really get the sense of character coming out of that line, right? This almost diva-esque attitude. But especially paired with the music and the way his voice, really approaches this high register, he does really start to sound out of control. And it sounds a little unnerving. It almost reminds me of something out of Twin Peaks. Hearing that and then going into this dance break has this weird, uncanny quality to it.
Yeah, and I want to talk more about the ending of the 84 version. But before we do that, I just want to make a couple more comments about the 82 version before we move on to the 84 ending. So the 82 version is a lot, how it ends is just a lot of riffing off of, the themes and saying he's possessed and doesn't know what to do. He curses more and uses more vulgar language in the 82 version. He says, he's fucked in the head. He uses the word pussy several times. He gets vulgar. He says like he wants to, take her into his bed. So he's really pushing the lust angle here. Your pussy puts up quite an awful fuss. I mean, he's just going,
and he's like grumbling as he said it. He sounds very, confident in this way. It's very sort of like domineering. And it works with the rest of the song, but it doesn't really match thematically in the same way of feeling like you're out of control.
He just sounds horny, you know? I mean, ultimately, right. The ending of the Possessed 82, it just sounds like he's horny for this woman, which is fine. If that's what his initial original thought on creating this song was, I'm going to write a song about being super horny about this girl who's really hot. She possesses my thoughts, and we're going to take that angle. And then, like I said, this is where the Lust You Always kind of, the two songs kind of hold hands in that way, because they're both kind of about that. They're both about being super horny for somebody. And but then the Possessed 84 version, though, instead of being just, maybe a little bit about being horny, it's more about, to me, it's more about being angry. It's more angry, and it's more pissed off that he's experiencing this and he's feeling these feelings, and he's like, maybe a little bit childish in some of the language he uses, like, does anybody want this body, as you mentioned. But then he's got this interlude towards the end of the song, is what we'll call it. Have you ever had the feeling that someone was tearing you up into little bitty pieces and contemplating selling you for a jigsaw puzzle? You are like an animal running around inside the cage. Oh, why aren't you due for a vacation, dirty liar? And then he says over and over again towards the end of the song, someone's in my body, someone's in my body, someone's in my box. I originally, I'll just be honest with you, I originally thought he was saying someone's in my thoughts. But the transcribed lyrics online that I found say someone's in my box. So I don't know.
But I feel like this last part of the song is really what kind of takes it up several notches into like great, unreleased Prince track territory for me. There's a lot of cool stuff instrumentally that happens too, where you get these like crazy synth effect buildups. And the, interlude that you're describing happens with this really cool, multi-harmony with this crazy sort of rhythm to it that...
And you can't forget the spelling out, the Possessed, which does not happen in the 82 version either.
Right. He takes what is a pretty good, groovy little demo from 82 and adds on, just all these different, like, let me add on a way creepier chord progression that's plucked by what sounds like a harp. Let me add in a super funky, super simple, like spelled out chant, that totally fits into something that James Brown might have done with his band. And then this interlude that he gets into is just like a super freaky image that at the same time totally fits in with the rest of the song. This idea of someone is tearing you up into pieces, which I think is close to a cliche, right? That feels like something you've heard in songs before, but he takes it, 2-3 steps further. They're tearing you into pieces, and they're thinking about selling you as a jigsaw puzzle, 1,000 pieces, what have you, so someone else can put you back together. And then I can't even really dissect the second half much. You are like an animal running around inside the cage of my heart. Aren't you due for a vacation, dirty liar? That's like 2 or 3 more metaphors to me. I don't even know how to necessarily piece them all together, but it's almost like this stream of consciousness, very loaded, impressionistic idea of, someone being in control or you being in control of them. It kind of just keeps replicating itself. And then you get to the end where he's doing the someone's in my body wail. And that's another thing that I think the performance does so much, where he has this sort of, aroused but also scared sound in his voice. And, it sounds like he is almost taunting someone at the same time. And I'm with you as well that I didn't understand the lyric totally to that last part, someone's in my body, someone's in my body. I thought he was just repeating that over and over and over again, which I think has its own sort of, allure to it. Has a lot of very rich, simple metaphors that come through there. But then ending with someone's in my box, I imagine ties back to the jigsaw puzzle idea, which is cool. It goes, even further to complicate that. Like, hey, if I'm a jigsaw puzzle and someone else is in my box, what does that mean? But also, I think speaks to some possible gender flipping there. I mean, I hate to be crude, but, box is a slang term that maybe he's playing around with a little bit there.
Maybe.
I think there's something to this idea of, losing control and being so intertwined or so possessed by somebody else, that he starts playing around even with, this idea of physical genitalia and things like that. I mean, it gets really sort of freaky is really the best word for it at the end. He's scared and he's changing shape maybe, or he's being shape shifted by something. It's really, really bananas.
Yeah, I mean, he sounds disturbed.
It reminds me of horror. It makes me think of David Lynch. It makes me think of somebody like David Cronenberg. The idea of somebody's mind controlling their body so much that they start to change shape, or being interfered with so much they change
body
shape.
Horror.
Yeah. Totally, yeah. And I think to tie all these ideas of losing identity, changing identity, body horror, all this stuff, I think it all growing out of this very simple universal root idea of being really turned on by somebody, you can't forget about them, or having a crush of some kind, that you're thinking about them and they might not thinking about you. He paints this totally out there, really bizarre portrait of being possessed by lust, and stretches it out over, 7.5 minutes, 8 minutes, something like that.
Mm-hmm. So the one theory that I just wanted to put out there, just because it may be interesting to people who really like talking about Prince's personal life.
I want to hear the background, the personal life backstory. I might not be caught up on here.
Well, and honestly, this is completely unsubstantiated whatsoever. But so these two songs were recorded about 2 years apart, a little less than. So one thing that happened in Prince's personal life from 82 to early 84 was the end of his relationship with Vanity. So in May of 1982, he and Vanity were thick as thieves. He was about to launch the Vanity 6 project. Things were good on the horizon potentially between them, and they seemed to have a strong relationship. They would appear on Rolling Stone magazine cover together here in the next 9 months or so, or 12 months after he broke big in 83. But by early 84, of course, that relationship had ended because she did not star in Purple Rain as was initially planned, as she would take the Apollonia role. So maybe by early 84, this woman that he potentially, and now I repeat that again, potentially had in mind when he was singing a song and writing a song called Possessed about being horny for this really hot woman because she's beautiful. We all know anybody who has eyes can see Vanity's a beautiful woman. But maybe early 84, he's angry at how their relationship ended, angry that he still thinks about her, and still probably, I'm going to say not probably, potentially had, thoughts of her in his head 6 months, 7 months after the end of their relationship, even though he wanted to move on, even though there was other women that were vying for his attention and affections. And even when he potentially was starting to, date other people, maybe Vanity was still in his head and he was angry about it because he did not like how their relationship ended. Allegedly, it did not end well. It ended over either money or, an affair. Depends on who you believe. Depends on what stories you want to believe. Dirty liar. He could be calling out somebody that was really close to him, because it seems kind of like a non sequitur to call somebody a dirty liar, because he's never at any point in the song and any of the lyrics has implied that this person has lied to him whatsoever. He's just talking about how he's so in lust and so in love and how he's possessed and can't stop thinking about this person. And then to end it like, aren't you due for a vacation? You're like an animal running inside the cage of my mind. Aren't you due for a vacation?
Yeah, totally. I didn't really think of it, I think maybe because I'm picturing Prince, height of his powers, even if he's writing a song this sort of torn up and tormented, I'm like, well, yeah, eventually when the song is over, he'll call the girl up and everything will work out. But I think you're right to approach it, whether it ties to his personal life specifically or not, to look at that last part of the interlude as a reference to a breakup or someone that you're missing or someone that you want but you can't have really does sort of explain some of the anger that's built up in there beyond, just, oh, I'm frustrated about being lustful. There is this venom that comes when he says, aren't you due for a vacation, dirty liar? And he's got this funky vocal multi-tracking happening. You can really read that as an idea of, an attack on someone that you used to be with or someone that you used to have a relationship with and you can't forget, or they keep they keep getting back in touch with you or something like that. That's a really interesting read because it does sort of curdle at the end in some way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Again, anybody listening to this episode wants to dispute that, please do. It's just my theory, and honestly, I'm probably not the first person to have thought of that either. I just haven't been able to find anywhere where it's put out there, but I'm certainly can't be the first person to come to that, or to jump to that conclusion with the difference in tone between the two versions. To me is drastic, especially towards the end, where it just goes downhill into a darker place where the performer just comes across as angry and pissed off and a little bit desperate and disturbed.
And the music kind of swells to match. I think it ends with these crazy, kick drum starts happening way more frequently, and the drums start going nuts, and there's all sorts of, crescendoing that's happening with the instrumental. And when I hate to use the term, but when he really climaxes with someone's in my body, and that repeated, refrain that he conjures up at the end there, it's this really powerful conclusion to the song, and it almost feels like he's getting lost in this swirl of emotions. There's anger, there's lust, there's desperation, there's sadness, there's venom, there's all this stuff that we've talked about, and it really feels like, as you said, the finished product by the time you hear this final version from 1984 that it doesn't really come across in the early version. That feels more like a demo, and I think also doesn't really come across in the live versions either. It's fun to hear it played live, but it's really more of a vamp. He doesn't sink his teeth into it in nearly the same way.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. That's why I really do think the 84 version is the definitive version for me. And other people might like the 82 version better, and that's fine. That's perfectly fine. But for me, and again, my money, I'm putting it on the 84 version, and I think you already said that you would as well.
Yeah, I did read I read a good story when I was flipping through that book I'd mentioned previously, the studio sessions, which is just fantastic. Understanding all the music he was working on across that time period and all the songs that went recorded and not released and all this stuff. But they talk about the band recording a rehearsal in August 83 with Prince and the Revolution, and doing, a bunch of extended jams and vamps and things like that. And I believe it was Susan Rogers, or I'm going to have to look up who was telling this story exactly. But basically they were rehearsing this song, and because it was a hot day, some fuses kept blowing. And so, they'd have to reset a console or reset some speakers or whatever. And because they were playing Possessed, they kept joking about, maybe it's the devil trying to stop us from playing the song, whatever, like maybe this is a sign we should stop. And it kept happening where the fuses kept blowing and blowing. And I'm quoting here, Prince said, "I'm not doing the song. It's not meant to be." He was so superstitious that way, and he just stopped. He moved on to something else and had that song cut another time. So this is 83, and he clearly still kept working on the song after that, so it didn't scare him off the song entirely or anything like that. But it is funny to think about the band making all these jokes about, they don't want us to play the song. The devil's coming after us. That must be why the fuses are blowing, until Prince is like, "You're right, we're done."
Yep. I can totally see that. I can see him just writing the song off, at least for the moment. Yeah. I mean, it can be looked at as a darker song in his early catalog. There's plenty of darker songs in his early catalog, but so it doesn't feel completely out of place. But if it was, 2014 or 2010 or something, maybe it wouldn't be quite so dark. So or maybe
Yeah, and
his
I
tone
think
would have
there's
been
an
different.
interesting arc to his early albums too, especially when you get to with Purple Rain sort of as the end of it, where as he goes on, he starts to engage with more serious or at least more dramatic material. You know, in Dirty Mind, he's got a song about not wanting to go to war, and the rest of his music is very, you know, sort of personal and sexual up until that point. Then you get into Atomic Anxiety and Controversy and in 1999, where, you know, he's making references to bombs dropping and nuclear consequences. And I think Possessed is him almost taking that a step further and getting into this existential, demonic, satanic, devilish idea that even goes beyond, you know, our day-to-day reality and getting into sort of, you know, supernatural or religious sides of things. I think that's kind of an interesting expansion of his material, you know, getting into the sort of dread that, you know, you can experience and the different ways you can stretch the metaphors that he's playing with. I do think this is sort of the start of the devilish material that he gets into later in his career, right? He does Dance with the Devil before the Batman soundtrack comes out that, you know, was certainly inspired by the movie, but is him playing around with these scarier sounds and talking about the devil. There's Spooky Electric in the Love Sexy era. And, you know, I'm sure there are other examples that I didn't pull from some of the later albums of him talking about the devil or demons or Satan or, you know, these sorts of scarier figures that, you know, you can represent in a purely religious light or use as a metaphor. And I think he really starts with it here in Possessed, and it's a really great example of him doing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. I agree with that, and I think that's a great way to kind of close this conversation, unless you had any further thoughts on Possessed that we haven't touched on yet.
No, I hope I'm excited to listen to the finished version of this and hear all the little parts we're talking about edited in, because there really is so much that goes on in any version of this song. It's really fun to hear all the different parts kind of come in and out, and you can really feel Prince kind of stretching his legs on these tracks. So I want to thank you for having me, because I feel like I've liked these songs for so long, but to have a reason to really dig into them and play them on loop, I'm like, oh, I think Possessed might be one of my favorite Prince tracks now. So I'm doing that all the time with Prince songs, but I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to really geek out on this one and really feeling it rise to the top of the rankings, you know?
Yeah, that happens to me all the time with these episodes. I like, wow, this song is way better than I thought it was. And then I move on to the next song. And it's like, wait, now this is the song that I think is way better than I thought it was. So yeah, you pour over something long enough and you really kind of, you know, peel it back and get more out of it for sure.
And I think that's Prince in miniature for me, is that there's no end in sight to the amount of music that's out there for everything that he released, everything that he recorded and didn't release, you know, the people he worked with, all the rehearsals and bootlegs and live stuff. You know, I really enjoy digging into all the ephemera that exists out there, because, you know, we look at a song like Possessed, which is fantastic and would be like so many other artists, it would be their stairway to heaven. You know, it would be their number one song, and for him, it's just a toss off kept in the vaults. You know, it's cliche to say that at this point, but you know, there's really so much to go through, and it was really fun to be able to geek out with you in a really official manner. And I hope anybody listening was doing the same here.
Yeah, me too. Me too. So thank you for being on the show, Jack. Can you point people in your direction from a social media standpoint, or anything that you wanted to highlight that you've done Prince related?
Yeah, I guess it's gauche to do this at this point. It feels like a sinking ship, but you can follow me on Twitter, which is my name, Jack Riedy. That's where I post a lot of the writing and general music bullshitting that I do. You can also find me on jackriedy.com. I got a website and everything where you can find all the stuff I've written. I've published a lot of Prince stuff in my day, and you can find it scattered all over the internet, including my lovely self-published book, Electric Word Life, which is currently all sold out, but you're welcome to marvel at the pictures and sign up to get a copy down the line if we ever do a reprint or something like that. You can slide into my DMs for that. So yeah, find me on the internet. I do a lot of talking about music and writing about music, and especially talking and writing about Prince. So I appreciate you giving me another forum to do that. It's been a blast.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much, Jack. This has been the Press Rewind Prince Lyrics podcast. I've been your host, Jason Brenninger, and you can find the show at pressrewind.net on various social media platforms such as Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, as well as YouTube. And I guess thanks to all the listeners. And until next time, goodbye.